Thank you for joining us in this second event of the first day of the XR Safety Week. Now we are ready to establish our connection with our guest today, and so he should be almost here. Let's see if our complex connection is okay. Let's start. One thing that I keep repeating when it comes to XR in journalism, but also in general for XR as a medium, is that we are in a very young, very early phase of this. The typical early phase where the medium is also a topic, which is quite different from the medium is the message. That is one of the typical sentences when it comes to media and discourse regarding media. But for XR, this issue, if we want to call it an issue, is particularly strong because XR is 99% of the time a topic. And today I want to start working on this path of transition together with a very valuable guest, such as Adam Marton, director of the Capital News Service Digital Bureau and lecturer within the Philip Merrill College of Journalism. So, Adam, first of all, thank you for being here at the XR Safety Week.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to talk.
Let's start talking about one of the fundamental bricks of information, data. Because for many decades, we've been dealing with an, let's say, linear growth of data available for news reporting. Then, with the internet mass adoption, the amount of data started to grow exponentially, almost out of control. If you think, for instance, how many minutes of videos are uploaded on YouTube every second, it's like, okay, impossible to count in a way, in human terms, okay? So today we have basically unlimited quantity and quality of data. So first of all, a very serious question. Why are we still using pie charts?
Well, like you, I don't like seeing a lot of pie charts. The pie chart's kind of a decisive unit in our community. A lot of data visualization experts are really against pie charts because they distort information, and they, the way they encode data is through angles and through area, which is it's tough to read specific values from a pie chart. It can be really easily manipulated. But to your point, I think we do still see a lot of really simple charts in journalism and in data viz in general, mostly bar charts and line charts, I would say. But I think that's good in a lot of ways. Simple charts are good, right? And the reason we see a lot of them is because people are familiar with them. They know how to read them. They know what they mean, right? In the journalism industry, we're often trying to communicate information quickly in a really simple and clear manner. When people interact with a chart in a news story, they might not have a lot of time to sort of sit with it. So we're trying to communicate our data often just as quickly and simply as possible. A lot of times, what we'll do is we'll iterate through data and try to figure out the best way to visualize it. And oftentimes what we come around to is not like the fanciest or the coolest graphic, but like the simplest data chart that communicates the data most clearly and most effectively. So a lot of times I say, if you have an interesting data, if you have something interesting to say, then a simple graphic isn't boring, right? But more complex visualizations are really useful too. If we say like a data visualization is a mix of art and science, you want to think like which side of that spectrum you want to be on, most visualizations fall somewhere on that spectrum. So maybe which side of that spectrum you want to be closer to. And I think the way we figure that out is by thinking about what are our requirements, how clearly do we need to communicate the exact values in our data, right? Are we trying to create a visualization where people can pull out the exact numbers, or are we trying to just show trends or give people sort of an overview of the data? Of course, one thing that more complex visualizations really offer is engagement, right? We can't assume that people are really interested and are going to spend a lot of time with our graphics. So if we make something that looks cool, people are more often more likely to engage with it. There's a lot of value in that, even if that means using lesser understood or lesser well-known chart types, for instance. So, sometimes that engagement can sort of come at the expense of really clear understanding or clear communication. But of course, like with online, like you said, it's really changed the game a lot, right? We have the ability to do much more complex online visualizations, whereas a graphic might be embedded in a news story. Just trying to make one point, we can make these larger, what we might call exploratory data visualizations online, where people can sort of interact with the data themselves and find their own stories in the data, as they say. I think when we think about chart types, and the complexity of a visualization, it goes back to like what you're trying to accomplish, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's for sure. And we must remember that the data we represent, the way we cut them, or the way we decide to exclude something is a very important and powerful way to transform data into information, to translate data into information. Nevertheless, for many decades, let's say that written journalism has been considered the one and the only pure, real form of journalism. So I come from radio, so I'm very involved in this discussion. Do you think that this perception toward visual journalism is changing, is switching, or are we still in this dualism between written, real, pure journalism and all the rest?
I think that's a great point. I do think things are changing, and I think online has a lot to do with that, obviously. This practice of what we might call data journalism has been around for a long time. It was previously called computer-assisted reporting, or CAR, which is sort of like an older term. But the last 10 years, there's been like a real sort of mainstream acceptance of the different forms of data and visual journalism. And I think there's a couple of reasons behind that. Certainly one is this proliferation of data that you mentioned in your previous question, this idea that there's all these open data portals, the government is putting out lots more data, industry is putting out a lot more data, academics, and then you just have people that are collecting and releasing data in this sort of open format. So, there's more data available. The computational methods, our ability to handle large amounts of data and process it, there's more of that available to us than ever before. So we also have more tools to analyze data and find stories. Programming languages like R and Python are really not too difficult to use if you have any kind of coding skills. And increasingly, the tools that we use to visualize data are becoming more accessible and easy to use. But what I really think helps bring along the acceptance of this kind of work and visual journalism in general is success stories, right? We can see through metrics that readers want this kind of work. It's a lot more palatable and easier to consume than these walls of text, right? Increasingly, we see just people not engaging with huge walls of text online. I think that reporters are oftentimes really discouraged when they look at the metrics that are available now. We can see how far down people read in a story. And I gotta tell you, it's not that far. People are really, these reporters spend a lot of time on their big stories, and people aren't getting to the bottom of them, So I think that visual journalism is a way that we can keep people engaged and tell these stories in ways that aren't just huge walls of text. What really, I think back to 2012 when the New York Times released their Snowfall interactive, which was first real big success, I think, in this sort of new world of visual online journalism, where it tells the story of some skiers that were caught in an avalanche, and it used video and 3D and text and graphics in this beautifully designed sort of online package that was really, I think it sort of precedes some of the immersive stuff that we're seeing today. In a lot of ways, I think that was the first step to a new way of presenting news online. It created this model that a lot of us could follow and say, oh, okay, so we don't just have to shove every one of our stories inside of the CMS or the news website so everything looks exactly the same. Now we can take big stories, we can put some design around them, we can put some code around them, and really make things interesting and engaging. Another example that I like to think of is last year, the Washington Post put out really nice data visualization by Harry Stevens that used just really simple animated dots to show how COVID can be spread among a population, and how social distancing can help staunch that spread. And it won a ton of awards. It was really effective at like taking these complex concepts and boiling them down, just some dots moving on a screen in a way that everybody can understand. So I think it's like really hard to ignore success stories like that, and that has helped sort of change our perception. I also think, and this is a little bit inside baseball, but the subscription model that a lot of news organizations have gone to has helped a lot. That this kind of work, visual journalism, data journalism, provides great value to readers. And as news organizations are focusing on providing that value as a means to increase subscriptions, they're relying on this more and more on this type of work. The previous model was like page views in order to increase ad inventory, and that doesn't really equal like quality. I think that trying to get people to pay for your content, you have to provide good content, and that increasingly has been a real boon to visual journalism.
Yeah, 100%. Especially because if you offer to subscribers some also complex products like this, you generally find a reader that says, in a way, okay, I paid for this, I deserve this, and I'm gonna read this. It's not a casual approach. You talked about 2012, so one of the first, how could I say, strongly revolutionary data visualization pieces of journalism. But let's dig deeper. Let's go into immersive data visualization, immersive narrative. So first of all, when did you meet it for the first time?
Sure. I think that, like I said, it's 2012 with Snowfall was a big change, where we were, there was work with graphics and with coding and journalism before that, but a lot of it was really focused on product, and what we were really seen as sort of like support folks or production folks. And I think that helped usher in this way to use code and data for storytelling in a way that we hadn't seen before, that I think has like continued to branch out into what we see happening in XR and immersive today. I always remember sitting down with the reporters and my team and showing them Snowfall and being like, this is what we want to do, bring us a story. But for the first time that I really saw the great potential in XR is here I'm at University of Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And a number of years ago, the Natural History Museum and the Smithsonian did a big sort of rehabilitation of their museum, moved around all of their exhibits. And basically, we all grew up going to this museum. It's where the dinosaur bones are. We all went when we were kids. And it was sort of an old stuffy place. And they completely changed it and made it this just absolutely gorgeous modern museum with interactive exhibits. And it's just gorgeous. But the Post did a XR sort of 360 video browser-based experience that sort of walked you through it. And I was just blown away by that and really immediately saw, okay, so this is a new way to tell stories, right? It's not like the reporter or the designer is walking you through and telling you what to look at. It's like, hey, we made this thing, now you go through and look at it yourself, right? And that's really cool to see like a museum exhibit that way. And obviously there's a lot of great applications for that with events and places, but the storytelling potential to that for news events is just huge. And we see it now with that we've seen the way people are using Blender to sort of make 3D animations walking through certain news events. And the New York Times did one of the Tulsa massacre that was just extraordinary, right? And you can be transported back to something that happened 50 or 100 years ago in this way that's like you're there. So for me, it was that sort of Natural History Museum tour that really sort of opened my eyes to it.
Wonderful. And Obviously, when you change medium, when you change the way to tell something, to represent something, and you have both coding experience, design experience, so a lot of different ways to think about the information. But adding the immersive paradigm, in which way makes you change the way you think about what you're representing?
Yeah, for me, it's taking it to an even more visual manner. I think that in the last 10 years, what it means to be like a data journalist has just been changing and expanding like constantly. It's not just people analyzing data, it's also people visualizing data. And this has overlapped with what might be termed computational journalism, people who deal with like AI and algorithms and more complex computational issues. And I think that XR is just going to expand that field out like even further. All these practices are going to intersect and overlap in the name of journalism and storytelling. I mean, I think that for computational journalists, XR opens a whole new, just toy box in some ways for, creative coding and programmers to really become much more integral part of what we're doing here. But, what I think is really exciting is bringing photojournalists and videographers into the into the fold a little bit more, that where instead of them be like, okay, well, we're going to take your photos and we're going to take your videos and we're going to integrate it into this experience. It's like, no, they're really integral to this, right? So I think that we're going to see, that's what I find really fascinating about XR is just the projects are so complex, right? And it takes these really wide skill sets to create. So just sort of bringing all these aspects together into one big project. But I think that the opportunity for photojournalists, news videographers is just really fascinating.
And when it comes to you personally, or well, better said, professionally, if you had to choose one of the works you have done, one of the publishing that you have done that challenged in particular way the way you think about what you were representing, what would you choose?
I think that, it worked. Yeah, that's a great question. In 2015, I live in Baltimore City and worked at the Baltimore Sun for most of my career. And there was a big case where a man was picked up by the police. And then when he was dropped off the police station, he was badly injured. His name's Freddie Gray. And it started it was one of the things that ended up starting the Baltimore riots in 2015. And, we had the police released like their version of events of what happened. It very clearly was not complete, so to say. And our reporters went out on the street and found eyewitnesses all over the city that had seen, things happen with this van at all the places that the van stopped while Freddie Gray was in the back of it on the way to the police station. And they had video of all these people. And it was really like, rarely do we get the opportunity to do these stories like in for breaking news like that, but this was really important. And we sort of stayed for a couple days, very late at night, putting together an interactive that really focused on these eyewitness videos and tried to present it in a way that challenged the narrative that the police had put out. And it was different from anything we've done before because it was a real focus on video and sort of this complex timeline. And it was challenging these this sort of greater narrative that the police were trying to put forward. And it felt like really important work. And ultimately we won a lot of prizes for it. We were Pulitzer finalists, but it felt important. And to this day, it's the thing that I worked on that I'm sort of most proud of.
We started by saying that, well, there is a long way to go before using immersive media as journalism tools is massively adopted. And I would also say, not necessarily it will be massively adopted, but do you think that in a way the change of paradigm has started? So we are starting to incorporate in our everyday life immersive data visualization, or are we still at excellence stories, success stories, and nothing more?
Oh, I mean, I think I think right now you're right that a big focus of the journalism industry with XR is like covering these technologies, and I think that's, that in some ways is as it should be, right? Our role is to help the public understand what's happening in tech, in much the same way like we're covering crypto and NFTs, and I think that's our primary function. But I do think that this shift that you're talking about has really started. We're seeing these large news organizations again, like excuse me, I'll talk about the Washington Post and the New York Times over and over again, because they're really, in the United States, leading the charge as far as really quality journalism with a lot of money and resources behind them. They're starting to experiment with XR in really interesting ways. The New York Times did just a beautiful immersive piece during the pandemic that used 3D animation and what we call scrollytelling interactions to show how different types of masks filter out different aerosol particles. And it was just gorgeous, and it can take something like that where you're like, man, this does not sound like an exciting topic, and just draw you in a way that just really, I learned so much about the way that different fibers, filter out different aerosol particles. And it does it in such a beautiful way that you're like, wow, I want to learn this. So I think that, I think that the shift has started. We've also seen, Time Magazine and USA Today have done interesting stuff using I think wearables might be the technology, might be the term where you have like goggles or glasses or things with your phone. And I think those are all interesting, sort of interesting developments. And so you're seeing these larger news organizations starting to experiment. And I think that's how it will filter down. Giorgia Lupi, who's an Italian graphic designer, she's a partner at Pentagram. She's not a journalist, but she has done some really interesting things with like participatory XR that I think has a lot of potential uses for journalism. She's somebody who sort of really revolutionized the data viz field in the last decade. And I see her doing some really interesting things in XR that I'm paying attention to. Ultimately, I think that we'll see ideas and methods coming from lots of places: the art world, video games, multimedia agencies, computer programmers, filmmakers are all going to sort of be throwing ideas into this pot that we're all going to draw from ultimately to tell stories. I also think that the pandemic changed, things in a lot of ways. The way that people work and play and interact with each other. I think there's a greater hunger now for like virtual experiences than there ever was before. I know in my friend group, I've seen more people playing games on the Oculus and meeting in these virtual spaces, people being more willing to go to, virtual concerts because we can't go to concerts in person. And I think that just opens up lots of avenues for immersive media and XR.
Yeah, clearly it opens as well one critical aspect that is a digital divide, because news needs to be accessible, need to be need to reach also the most disadvantaged categories. So this is something we should keep in mind. But apart from this, I want to get back to what you said starting your previous answer. You said, I'm talking about Washington Post, New York Times, so big news corporation with a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of potential. So do you think that cost is one of the defining factors of or like defining obstacle for a wider, better, deeper data visualization in the general press?
Sure, definitely. I can't let the digital divide thing is so important. I'm so glad you brought that up. When I was first working in online news, we used to have this saying where we would never build anything that a 14-year-old connecting via 56K modem at a library in West Baltimore couldn't load, right? Because that's who our audience is, right? We're trying to really reach everyone. And that is such an important thing when you're talking about sort of the public service aspect of journalism. Thanks so much for bringing that up, Marco. Certainly cost is a big obstacle. I think it's cost and it's time and it's resources. When you think about developing projects for the news, like news moves fast, and the time involved in creating these large projects is really, it doesn't sync well with the news cycle. I know that, and that's the same thing with creating these large multimedia presentations, and that's why generally you don't see them really applied to breaking news. We do this kind of work for what we call enterprise stories or for investigative stories generally, things that don't have to be out tomorrow. So I think that time's a big deal, certainly cost, and resources. Like I said earlier, the skill sets involved in creating this type of work are so wide. It just requires a lot of different skills. And I don't think a lot of those skills are really readily available in today's newsroom. I get the feeling that some of the bigger news organizations that are doing this type of work now are working with agencies that are specializing in these types of projects. I could be wrong. That's just a feeling that I get. But maybe that's a good model. I don't know. I mean, does it make sense to have experts in each of these things in the newsroom? I think you'll see some newsrooms it does make sense, others it doesn't, in which case working with agencies is a good way to go. But I think in general, it's that idea of resources and like the wide involved skill sets are the biggest obstacle.
Yeah, and I don't know because I don't know if it's the case in the United States as well, but many times when you go to other countries, such as Italy, where I'm located in this moment, there is also the issue of finding the editorial company that's ready for this transition, because sometimes, especially small outlets are a bit worried of not scaring the audience, for instance. But I struggle in understanding or in deciding if the issue stands on the audience or on the editor. And I don't think there is a clear response on this. What do you think?
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think, where are there even agencies available that can do this type of work? I would assume in the States outside of New York and LA, you're not going to find a lot of agencies that are really even up to the task of doing that. I think that's a great point. Though I do think the audience is ready. I do believe that. I think that for the news industry, that browser-based experiences, at least for now, are going to be more palatable to the audience because they don't have to do something else, right? So if you can make it happen on the phone or you can make it happen in the browser, I think that's where we're going to see some real success stories. But if you could do it on your phone, I think the audience is ready.
And now take your crystal ball, because we're talking very briefly about the future. Do you think that if we get to a mass adoption of AR glasses in the next, let's say, 5 to 7 years, this will foster some revolution in the way we use information?
Sure. I think, it's so funny that these things can change so quickly, where I could never have imagined myself using something like that, but all of a sudden 3 or 4 friends have them and are playing a game together. And I'm like, oh, I got served an ad for it on Twitter yesterday for the Oculus, and I clicked on it. And I thought, okay, $300, maybe, and then now I'm seeing, like I said, concerts, being available. And yeah, I think it could happen. I do. And certainly if people have the technology, then, I think that the news industry will jump right in, definitely.
And we'll try to be ready for this. Adam, it's been a real pleasure to have the discussion with you. Just one thing before we say goodbye. Is there any website you want to recommend to see your work, the things you are creating, the ideas you are sharing with the community?
Sure, but I run a student-powered website here at University of Maryland, where we have a data bureau where they do lots of great interactive work, and that's at cnsmaryland.org.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, and I hope we will talk soon. And for now, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marco. Appreciate the time.